My daughter uninvited me to her wedding for being too poor. I sat on a bench holding my only sandwich. When I saw a beggar digging through the trash with his dog, I gave them my entire dinner. 2 hours later, 15 black BMWs blocked the venue. The man stepped out and simply said something that, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The phone rang at 7:15 in the morning, cutting through the peaceful silence of my small kitchen. I was standing at the counter, spreading peanut butter on day-old bread for what would be my only meal until dinner. The caller ID showed Cora's name, and my heart immediately lifted. My daughter rarely called anymore, especially not this early. "Cora, sweetheart," I answered, unable to hide the joy in my voice. "How are you feeling? Only 3 days until the big day." The silence that followed lasted long enough to make me check if the call had dropped. When Cora finally spoke, her voice was different. Cold, distant. Nothing like the excited bride-to-be I'd expected. "Mom, I need to talk to you about Saturday." I set down my knife, giving her my full attention. "Of course. What about it? Do you need help with anything? I know I can't afford much, but that's exactly what I'm calling about." Her words came fast, like she'd rehearsed them. "Mom, I've been thinking, and Bradley's family. They're very particular about appearances. The Whitmores have a certain image to maintain." My stomach began to twist. "I don't understand. What does that have to do with— You can't come to the wedding." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knees suddenly weak. "What did you say?" "I'm uninviting you, Mom. I'm sorry, but you don't fit in with what we're trying to create. Your clothes, your background, the way you talk about money all the time because you don't have any. It would be embarrassing." I couldn't breathe. 26 years of raising this girl alone, working 3 jobs to keep food on our table, wearing the same 4 dresses for years so she could have new school clothes. 26 years, and this was what I got in return. "Cora, please. I'm your mother. I raised you by myself after your father died. I gave you everything I had. And I'm grateful for that, I really am. But Mom, this is my chance to finally have a real family. The Whitmores are successful people. They vacation in the Hamptons and attend charity galas. They don't need to count every dollar like we always did. I can't have you there reminding everyone of where I came from." Each word felt like a knife twisting deeper. "Where you came from. You came from love, Cora. You came from a mother who worked herself to the bone to give you opportunities. I know, and like I said, I'm grateful. But this is bigger than us now. This is about my future with Bradley and his family. They've already expressed concerns about my background, and having you there would just make things worse." I thought about the new dress hanging in my closet. $300 I'd saved over 8 months, eating nothing but peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day. It was the first new dress I'd bought myself in 5 years, and I'd chosen it specifically for her wedding. Navy blue with small white flowers, simple but elegant. I'd imagined dancing with her, watching her face light up when she saw me looking my best for her special day. "What about your father's memory?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "He should be represented there. I'm the only connection you have to him." "Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is. I've made my decision. You can watch the ceremony online if you want. Bradley's cousin is live streaming it." Live streaming. She wanted me to watch my only child's wedding through a computer screen like a stranger, like I meant nothing to her at all. "I helped pay for this wedding," I said, my voice stronger now, anger mixing with the pain. "That $2,000 I gave you last month was my entire savings account, money I'd been putting away for emergencies. And I told you not to do that. I never asked you to empty your savings. You did that on your own, and then you held it over my head like you always do. Everything with you is about money, Mom. How much you spent? How much you sacrificed? It's exhausting." My hands were shaking now. It's not about the money, Cora. It's about love. Everything I did, every sacrifice I made, was because I love you more than my own life. I know you love me in your way, but your way isn't healthy, Mom. The guilt trips, the constant reminders of what you've given up for me. Bradley's parents don't do that. They just give freely without expecting gratitude or making you feel like you owe them something. I never wanted you to owe me anything. I wanted you to understand that love sometimes requires sacrifice, that families support each other through hard times. Well, I don't want that kind of family anymore. I want the kind where people are successful and stable and don't have to worry about keeping the lights on. I want to be a Whitmore now. The finality in her voice told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a discussion. This wasn't even really a phone call. It was a dismissal. So that's it then? 26 years, and I'm just dismissed? It doesn't have to be forever, Mom. Once Bradley and I are settled, maybe things can be different. But right now, I need you to respect my decision and stay away from the wedding. I closed my eyes, picturing her as a little girl, how she used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared her, how she'd beg me to read just one more bedtime story, how proud she looked when she graduated high school, running to hug me first, telling me she couldn't have done it without me. That little girl was gone. In her place was a woman who saw me as an embarrassment, a burden, a reminder of a life she wanted to forget. Will you at least tell me about it afterward? Will you call and tell me how beautiful you looked? How the ceremony went? Another long pause. I think it's best if we don't talk for a while, Mom. I need space to start my new life. The line went dead. I stood in my empty kitchen, still holding the phone, still wearing the same worn bathrobe I'd had for 10 years. The peanut butter sandwich sat forgotten on the counter, and suddenly, I wasn't hungry anymore. I wasn't anything anymore. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet, staring at that navy dress. $300. 8 months of skipped lunches. All for a wedding I wasn't welcome at, for a daughter who no longer wanted me in her life. But even as the tears came, even as my heart broke into pieces, I knew something with absolute certainty. I had been a good mother. I had loved her with everything I had. If that wasn't enough for her, if that embarrassed her, then the problem wasn't with me. I was going to that wedding, not to cause a scene, not to embarrass her, just to see my little girl get married from a distance, just to be there, even if she didn't want me to be. Because that's what mothers do. We love our children even when they break our hearts. 3 days later, I found myself sitting on a weathered wooden bench across from the most beautiful building I'd ever seen. The Whitmore Estate's main hall rose before me like something from a fairy tale, all white marble columns and cascading flower arrangements. Even from this distance, I could hear the soft melody of a string quartet warming up, the gentle murmur of arriving guests, the clink of expensive glasses being arranged. I'd put on the navy dress after all. It fit perfectly, and despite everything, it made me feel dignified. I'd done my hair in a simple bun and worn my mother's pearl necklace, costume jewelry she'd bought at Woolworth's 40 years ago, but it still caught the light beautifully. If someone glanced my way from across the street, they might think I belonged here. But I didn't belong here. Cora had made that abundantly clear. I unwrapped my peanut butter sandwich, the same lunch I'd been eating for months to save money for her wedding gift. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I sat, eating the meal of someone who couldn't afford anything else, while watching my daughter marry into a family that probably spent more on flower arrangements than I made in a year. The bench was positioned under an old oak tree that provided perfect shade and an unobstructed view of the estate's main entrance. I could see the elegant guests arriving in their luxury cars, women in designer dresses that probably cost more than my annual rent, men in tailored suits that fit like they were born wearing them. Everyone looked polished, confident, like they'd never questioned whether they belonged somewhere. I took a small bite of my sandwich, chewing slowly to make it last. It would be my only food until I got home tonight. But watching from here, Seeing Cora's wedding from afar, somehow it felt worth it. That's when I noticed him. An elderly man was crouched beside a garbage bin near the corner of the street, his weathered hands carefully sorting through the contents. A small dog, some kind of terrier mix with graying fur around his muzzle, sat patiently beside him, his tail wagging hopefully. The man was dressed in layers despite the warm afternoon, a faded brown coat over what looked like several shirts, pants that had seen better decades, and boots that were held together more by determination than leather. But something about him caught my attention. His movements were careful, methodical. He wasn't frantically digging like someone desperately hungry. He was searching with the patience of someone who had learned to find dignity even in desperate circumstances. The dog looked up at his companion with such pure loyalty and love that it made my chest ache. Here was devotion that asked for nothing in return except companionship. The kind of love I thought I'd shared with Cora before she decided I was an embarrassment. The man found something, a partially eaten apple, and examined it carefully before offering it to his dog first. The animal sniffed politely but didn't take it, as if he understood that his friend needed it more. The gesture of offering it first, though, that spoke of a man who still remembered kindness even when he had nothing left to give. I looked down at my sandwich, peanut butter on day-old bread. Simple but filling, probably more substantial than anything that man had eaten today. Before I could talk myself out of it, I stood up and walked toward them. "Excuse me," I called out softly, not wanting to startle either of them. The man looked up, and I was struck by his eyes. They were a warm brown, clear and intelligent, set in a face that showed the wear of too many hard nights, but also held a dignity that circumstances couldn't erase. His silver hair was clean but shaggy, and his beard was neatly trimmed despite his obvious situation. "Ma'am?" he said, straightening up with surprising grace. His voice was cultured, educated. Not what I'd expected. "I was wondering if you and your friend might be hungry," I said, holding out my sandwich. "I have more than I need." He stared at the offering, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe even suspicion. People probably didn't often approach him with kindness. "That's very generous of you," he said carefully, "but I couldn't take your lunch." "Please," I insisted. "I insist. It's just peanut butter, nothing fancy, but it's fresh." The dog had perked up at the mention of food, his tail wagging more enthusiastically. The man looked down at his companion, and I could see the moment his resolve softened. "Well," he said, "if you're certain. Charlie here hasn't had a proper meal in a couple of days." "Charlie's a handsome fellow," I said, watching as the man carefully tore the sandwich in half, offering the larger piece to his dog first. Charlie accepted it gently, his tail never stopping its grateful motion. "He's been with me for 3 years now," the man said, taking a small bite of his portion. "Found him as a puppy, abandoned behind a restaurant. Funny how the ones who have the least are sometimes the most loyal." Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. "You speak like someone who's seen both sides of life." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "I suppose I have. Life has a way of teaching lessons you never expected to learn. What about you? What brings you to sit on a park bench dressed for a wedding?" The question caught me off guard. I gestured toward the estate across the street. "My daughter's getting married today. Over there." His eyes followed my gesture, taking in the obvious luxury and grandeur of the celebration. "And you're here instead of there because—" The kindness in his voice, the genuine interest, broke something open inside me. "Because she uninvited me. Said I would embarrass her in front of her new family." "Ah." He nodded slowly, like he understood something important. "And yet here you are, close enough to share in her joy from afar, but far enough away to honor her wishes. That takes a special kind of love." I felt tears threatening again. I raised her by myself after her father died, 26 years of putting her first, and this is what I get. She's ashamed of where she came from. Children sometimes mistake the packaging for the contents, he said quietly. They see poverty and think it means failure. They don't see the love, the sacrifice, the strength it takes to raise a child with nothing but determination and heart. His words were like a balm to my wounded soul. Here was a stranger who understood what my own daughter couldn't see. "What about you?" I asked. "Do you have family?" His expression grew distant. "I had a daughter once. Lost her to my own mistakes, my own pride. By the time I learned what really mattered, it was too late to fix things between us." "I'm sorry." "So am I. But it taught me something valuable about the nature of love and family. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us fail us, and sometimes complete strangers show us more kindness than we've ever known." He finished the last bite of sandwich and looked at me with those remarkably clear eyes. "Thank you for this. For seeing us as human beings worth feeding. You have no idea how rare that kind of compassion is." "Everyone deserves kindness," I said simply. "Yes," he agreed. "They do. But not everyone is brave enough to act on that belief. You are, though. You're braver than you know." Charlie had finished his portion and was now sitting politely, looking back and forth between us as if following our conversation. The man reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears. "We should let you get back to your vigil," he said. "But thank you again. This meant more than you can imagine." "Take care of yourselves," I said. "Both of you." As I walked back to my bench, I felt lighter somehow. Sharing that simple meal had filled something empty inside me that I hadn't even realized was there. Maybe it was knowing that I could still help someone, still matter to someone, even if that someone was a stranger. I settled back onto the bench and watched as more guests arrived at the estate. The ceremony would start soon. My daughter would walk down that aisle, and I would watch her become a wife from this distance, holding on to the memory of her childhood when she still thought I was the most important person in her world. But something had changed during my brief encounter with the man and his dog. I no longer felt quite so alone, quite so worthless. I had shown kindness when I could have wallowed in my own pain. I had chosen to give when I had little to spare. Maybe that said something about who I really was. Maybe that was worth something, even if my daughter couldn't see it. 2 hours had passed since my encounter with the homeless man and his dog. The wedding ceremony had begun, and I could hear the distant sound of music drifting across the street from the Whitmore estate. A Bach piece, I thought. Something elegant and timeless that spoke of old money and refined taste. Everything Cora had always dreamed of. I remained on my bench, watching the last few stragglers hurry through the ornate gates. Women clutching small beaded purses, men adjusting their cufflinks, everyone moving with the confidence of people who belonged exactly where they were going. I wondered if Cora was nervous, if she was thinking about me at all, or if she was so caught up in finally achieving her dream that she'd forgotten I existed. The afternoon sun was beginning to shift, casting longer shadows across the manicured grounds. I was considering whether to stay for the reception or head home when I heard the sound of engines approaching. Not just 1 or 2 cars, but what sounded like a convoy. I turned to see a procession of black BMW sedans turning onto the street, 15 of them, each one gleaming like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. They moved in perfect formation, their windows tinted so dark I couldn't see who was inside. The lead car pulled up directly in front of the estate's main entrance, while the others arranged themselves along the street with military precision. The entire wedding party on the estate grounds stopped what they were doing. Guests who had been mingling on the terrace turned to stare. Even the string quartet seemed to falter for a moment before resuming their performance with less certainty. My heart began to race. This wasn't part of the planned festivities. This was something else entirely. The driver of the lead BMW stepped out first, a tall man in a black suit who moved with the bearing of professional security. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the rear door with practiced efficiency. The man who emerged took my breath away. Gone were the layers of worn clothing, the weathered boots, the unkempt appearance. In their place stood someone I barely recognized, the same man I had shared my sandwich with but transformed. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than I made in several months. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his beard trimmed to precise lines. But it was his bearing that struck me most, the way he carried himself with quiet authority, like someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. Charlie emerged from the car beside him, but even the dog looked different. His fur had been brushed to a glossy shine, and he wore a leather collar that looked like it was made by the same craftsman who created designer handbags. Yet his tail wagged with the same enthusiasm when his eyes found mine across the street. I sat frozen on my bench, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be the same man who had been searching through garbage just hours ago. But those eyes, those warm, intelligent brown eyes, were unmistakable. He stood for a moment beside his car, surveying the estate grounds with the calculating gaze of someone taking inventory. Then his eyes found mine, and he smiled. Not the grateful, humble smile of someone accepting charity, but something far more complex, something that held secrets and power and a depth I was only beginning to understand. He said something to his driver, who nodded and returned to the car. Then he began walking toward me, crossing the street with measured steps, while Charlie trotted happily beside him. The 15 cars remained where they were, their drivers standing at attention like an honor guard. As he approached my bench, I could see details I had missed before. His shoes were handmade Italian leather. His watch was the kind I had only seen in magazine advertisements. Even his posture spoke of wealth and authority. Not the careful dignity of someone with nothing, but the relaxed confidence of someone who had never doubted their place in the world. "Hello again," he said, settling onto the bench beside me as if we were old friends meeting for afternoon tea. I stared at him, my mouth opening and closing without sound. Finally, I managed to whisper, "Who are you?" He smiled, and I caught a glimpse of the warmth I had seen in the homeless man, but now it was framed by something much more powerful. "William Ashford," he said simply, "and I owe you a debt of gratitude." The name hit me like a physical blow. William Ashford. I knew that name. Everyone knew that name. He owned half the commercial real estate in 3 states. His face had been on the cover of Forbes magazine just last month. His net worth was measured in billions, not millions. But you were," I stammered. "Homeless?" "Yes, in a manner of speaking. It's something I do periodically. A way of testing the true nature of humanity when people think I have nothing to offer them." His eyes grew serious. "Most people fail that test, Eunice." The fact that he knew my name sent another shock through me. "How do you—" "After you left, I made some inquiries. It's not difficult when you have the right resources." He gestured toward the estate across the street. I wanted to understand the full story before I acted. "Acted? What do you mean, acted?" William leaned back against the bench, his gaze moving to the wedding celebration. "I've been testing people for 15 years now, Eunice. Wearing different disguises, putting myself in situations where I appear to need help. Do you know how many people have offered to share their meal with a stranger? In 15 years of trying?" I shook my head. 7. You're the 7th. And you're the first who clearly had so little to spare that sharing meant going without yourself. His voice softened. "You gave away your only food to feed a homeless man and his dog. You saw dignity where others saw failure. You chose compassion over self-preservation." Tears were starting to blur my vision. "It was just a sandwich." "No," he said firmly. "It was everything. It was proof that goodness still exists in a world that often seems to have forgotten what that means." Charlie had wandered over and was sitting at my feet, looking up at me with those same loyal eyes. I reached down to pet him, and his tail wagged with pure joy. "Why?" I asked. "Why do you test people like this?" William's expression grew distant. Because I once had everything handed to me and took it all for granted. I was cruel to people who deserved better. I valued wealth over character, status over substance. It cost me the person I loved most in the world. He paused, his hands folded in his lap. My daughter. She died in a car accident 20 years ago, and the last words we spoke to each other were in anger. She had wanted to marry someone I considered beneath our family's station. I threatened to disown her if she went through with it. My heart clenched. Oh, William. She went through with it anyway. And 3 months later, she and her husband were killed by a drunk driver. I never got the chance to tell her I was wrong, that love matters more than money, that character matters more than credentials. The pain in his voice was raw, real. This wasn't the polished suffering of someone who had learned to use their tragedy for sympathy. This was the deep, abiding grief of someone who had lost everything that truly mattered. I started the testing as a way to find people like her husband, good people who might not look right on paper, but who had genuine hearts. I wanted to help them, to honor her memory by supporting the kind of person she saw value in. He turned to look at me directly. And occasionally I find someone like you. Someone who reminds me that there are still people in this world who understand that our worth isn't measured by our bank accounts or our social connections, but by how we treat others when we think no one important is watching. The sounds from the estate seemed to fade as the weight of his words settled over me. This man, this billionaire who could buy and sell entire companies, had been testing humanity, and somehow I had passed. What happens now? I asked. William stood up, adjusting his suit jacket with practiced ease. Now, I think it's time I attended this wedding, as a friend of the bride's family. My stomach dropped. William, no. Please don't cause a scene. I don't want to embarrass Cora any more than I already have just by existing. He looked down at me, and his smile was gentle but determined. My dear Eunice, I'm not going to embarrass anyone. I'm simply going to attend a wedding and perhaps share a few thoughts about the nature of family and the true meaning of worth. He extended his hand to me. Would you care to accompany me, as my honored guest? I stared at his outstretched hand, my mind reeling. Everything I thought I knew about this day had just changed. The homeless man I had fed was one of the most powerful people in the country. The daughter who had rejected me was about to encounter a force she had never imagined. But more than that, I was being offered something I had never expected. The chance to walk into that wedding not as an embarrassment, not as someone who didn't belong, but as the guest of honor of someone who understood exactly what kind of person I really was. I took his hand and let him help me to my feet. Yes, I said, my voice stronger than it had been all day. I think I would like that very much. Walking through the gates of the Whitmore estate on William Ashford's arm was like stepping into a different world, the same world I had been watching from across the street, but now I was inside it, part of it. The marble walkway felt solid beneath my feet. The scent of expensive roses filled the air, and everywhere I looked, I saw the kind of elegance Cora had always dreamed of. But more than the luxury, what struck me was the reaction of the guests. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as we passed. Heads turned. Whispers started immediately. Not malicious whispers, but the kind that happen when someone truly important arrives unexpectedly. I could hear fragments. Is that William Ashford? What's he doing here? Who's the woman with him? William moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who was accustomed to this kind of attention. He nodded politely to people who approached, shook hands when necessary, but kept us moving steadily toward the main reception area. Charlie patted alongside us, completely at ease despite the formal setting, as if expensive weddings were a regular part of his routine. "Mr. Ashford!" a voice called out from behind us. We turned to see a distinguished man in his 60s approaching quickly, his face showing a mixture of surprise and barely concealed panic. I recognized him immediately. Charles Whitmore, Bradley's father and the patriarch of this entire celebration. "Charles," William said warmly, extending his hand. Congratulations on your son's wedding. I hope you don't mind my dropping by unannounced." "Mind? Of course not, of course not," Charles stammered, clearly flustered. "We're honored by your presence, but I had no idea you knew our family." "Actually, I don't know your family at all," William said with a slight smile. "I'm here because of Mrs. Henderson." He placed a gentle hand on my arm. "She's an old friend, and when I learned about today's celebration, I simply had to attend." Charles' eyes shifted to me for the first time, and I could see him trying to place me. His expression was polite, but confused. Clearly, I wasn't on any guest list he was familiar with. "Mrs. Henderson," William continued, "is one of the most remarkable women I've had the privilege to know. A woman of extraordinary character and generosity." "How lovely," Charles said, though his confusion was evident. "And how do you two know each other?" "She fed me when I was hungry," William said simply. "Shared her only meal with a stranger who needed it more than she did." In my experience, that kind of selfless compassion is incredibly rare. I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment, but William's hand on my arm was steady and reassuring. Around us, more people were gathering, drawn by the novelty of William Ashford attending an event he hadn't been expected at. That's wonderful," Charles said, still clearly puzzled about why this warranted a personal appearance from one of the most powerful men in the state. "Where I come from," William continued, his voice carrying just loud enough for the growing crowd to hear, "we believe that character is the true measure of a person's worth. Not their bank account, not their social connections, but how they treat others, especially when they have little to give." I could see heads nodding throughout the gathering. This was exactly the kind of sentiment that played well at charitable events and society functions. The idea that virtue mattered more than wealth, even though most of these people had never had to choose between the two. "Mrs. Henderson embodies that principle better than anyone I've ever met," William went on. "She raised her daughter single-handedly after losing her husband at a young age, worked multiple jobs to ensure that child had every opportunity to succeed, sacrificed her own comfort, her own dreams, so that her daughter could attend college and build a better life." My heart was pounding now. I could see Cora across the reception area, stunning in her white gown, but frozen in place as she watched this unexpected scene unfold. Her face had gone pale, and Bradley was beside her, looking equally confused. "And today," William's voice grew softer, more intimate, "that same daughter is getting married in this beautiful ceremony. A daughter who has clearly achieved everything her mother dreamed for her." Charles nodded along, smiling now, caught up in what seemed like a heartwarming story. "How wonderful that you're here to celebrate with them both." "Actually," William said, and something in his tone made the entire gathering lean in closer, "Mrs. Henderson wasn't originally planning to attend today's festivities." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. You see, her daughter felt that having her mother present might somehow diminish the elegance of the occasion. She was concerned that Mrs. Henderson's appearance, her background, might not reflect well on the family's new status. The temperature of the entire gathering seemed to drop several degrees. Charles's smile faltered. Around us, I could see faces changing as people began to understand what William was really saying. "I find that fascinating," William continued, his voice still perfectly pleasant, "because, in my experience, the people who are most concerned with appearances are usually the ones who have the least substance underneath. Real class, real elegance, comes from character. From the kind of love that sacrifices everything for someone else's happiness." Cora was moving toward us now, her face a mixture of panic and fury. She had clearly recognized me, despite my new status as William Ashford's honored guest. "Mr. Ashford," she called out as she approached, her voice bright and false. "What a wonderful surprise. I'm Cora, the bride." "Ah, yes," William said, turning to face her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The daughter. Congratulations, my dear. You look absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much, and thank you for being so kind to my mother. The last word came out strained, like it physically hurt her to acknowledge our relationship in front of all these people. Kind? Oh, my dear girl, your mother was the one who showed kindness. To a complete stranger who needed help. She gave away her only meal to someone she thought was homeless and hungry. William's eyes never left Cora's face. That's the kind of generosity that speaks to a person's true character. The kind of character that clearly runs in families. Cora's smile was becoming more strained by the second. She's always been generous that way. Yes, I imagine she has. 26 years of generosity from what I understand. 26 years of putting your needs before her own, your dreams before hers, your future before her present comfort. The crowd around us was completely silent now. Even the string quartet had stopped playing, though I wasn't sure if it was intentional or they had simply become too caught up in the drama to continue. I was just telling your father-in-law about the kind of sacrifice your mother made to ensure you could have opportunities she never had. Working 3 jobs, wearing the same clothes for years, living in a tiny apartment so you could attend college and build the life you wanted. Each word was like a knife, but not cutting me, cutting through the facade Cora had built around her new life. William was exposing the truth she had tried so hard to hide, but he was doing it in a way that made her look worse, not me. She even emptied her savings account to help pay for this wedding, William continued. $2,000, everything she had, because she wanted your special day to be perfect. Bradley stepped forward, his face dark with confusion and anger. Cora? What is he talking about? I thought your mother was. I thought you said. I said she couldn't make it today, Cora said quickly, but her voice was shaking now. I never said anything else. Couldn't make it? William's eyebrows rose slightly. How interesting. From what I understood, she was quite available to attend. In fact, she was so committed to being here that she spent her last $300 on a new dress specifically for the occasion. I looked down at my navy dress, the one I had sacrificed so much to buy. In this crowd of designer gowns and custom suits, it was clearly modest, clearly affordable. But William was presenting it as evidence of love, not poverty. The dress she's wearing right now, actually, William added. 8 months of giving up lunch every day to save the money, all so she could look her best for her daughter's wedding day. The silence was deafening. I could see Charles Whitmore's face changing as he processed what this meant about the family his son had just married into. I could see other guests exchanging glances, their expressions shifting from confusion to uncomfortable recognition. But perhaps, William said, his voice growing gentler, there was simply some kind of misunderstanding. After all, what mother wouldn't want to be present for her child's wedding day? And what daughter wouldn't want the woman who sacrificed everything for her to share in the most important moment of her life? Cora opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked around desperately, seeking some escape from the trap that was closing around her. But there was nowhere to go. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting for her answer. Yes, she finally whispered. Yes, of course there was a misunderstanding. I'm so glad you're here, Mom. But it was too late. The damage was done. Not to me. William had made sure of that. He had transformed me from an embarrassing burden into a woman whose love and sacrifice had been publicly acknowledged by one of the most respected men in the state. The damage was to Cora's carefully constructed image, to the story she had told about herself and her background. In trying to erase me, she had created a lie that was now impossible to maintain. William smiled at her, a kind but knowing expression. I'm sure you are, dear. After all, family is everything, isn't it? The people who love us enough to give us their last meal, their last dollar, their last hope. Those are the people who truly matter. And with that, he had said everything that needed to be said. The wedding reception continued around us, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Conversations resumed, but they were quieter, more subdued. I could feel eyes on me wherever William and I moved. Not the dismissive glances I had expected, but something closer to respect. Or perhaps curiosity about the woman who had somehow earned William Ashford's public endorsement. Cora had disappeared shortly after William's speech, claiming she needed to touch up her makeup. Bradley had followed her, his face tight with questions that clearly needed immediate answers. The Whitmore family was doing their best to maintain the facade of celebration, but I could see Charles and his wife exchanging worried glances when they thought no one was looking. William had introduced me to several people as a dear friend, and each time he shared some small detail about my character or my sacrifices for Cora. Never in a way that felt performative or calculating, but with genuine warmth and admiration. People listened to him, nodded along, asked me polite questions about my life. For the first time in years, I felt seen. But underneath the surreal nature of finding myself the honored guest at a wedding I hadn't been invited to, I was struggling with a growing unease. This wasn't really about me being vindicated or accepted. This was about Cora being exposed, humiliated in front of the very people she had wanted so desperately to impress. "You're having second thoughts," William observed quietly as we stood near the elaborate dessert table. Charlie was lying contentedly at our feet, occasionally accepting small treats from admiring guests who seemed charmed by his presence. "How did you know?" "Your face is very expressive. And you have a kind heart, the same heart that made you share your sandwich with a stranger. You're worried about your daughter." I nodded, watching across the room where Cora had finally returned, her smile bright but brittle as she accepted congratulations from guests. "She made a terrible choice, but she's still my daughter. And this feels like revenge." "Is it revenge you want?" The question hung between us. I thought about the phone call 3 days ago, the casual cruelty in Cora's voice, the way she had dismissed 26 years of love as an embarrassment. I thought about sitting alone on that bench, eating my last meal while watching her wedding from a distance like an unwelcome stranger. "No," I said finally, "I don't want revenge. I just wanted her to see me, to acknowledge that I matter, that what I did for her mattered. And now? Now I'm afraid she'll never forgive me for this, that I've lost her forever." William was quiet for a long moment, his eyes following my gaze to where Cora was laughing too loudly at something one of her new relatives had said. "Eunice, can I tell you something about forgiveness?" I nodded. Real forgiveness, the kind that heals instead of just patching over wounds, requires truth first. You can't forgive what you won't acknowledge happened. Your daughter convinced herself that you were the problem, that your love came with too high a price, that your sacrifices were somehow burdensome instead of beautiful. He paused, adjusting his tie with the unconscious gesture of someone accustomed to formal wear. But she was living a lie, building her new life on the foundation of denying who you are and what you gave her. That's not sustainable, and it's not healthy. So you forced the truth into the open. I revealed what was already true. The question now is what she chooses to do with that truth. As if summoned by our conversation, Cora appeared beside us. Her wedding makeup was still perfect, but I could see the strain around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. She had clearly been crying, though she had done her best to hide it. "Mom," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "could I speak with you privately? Please?" I looked at William, who nodded encouragingly. "I'll be right here when you're ready," he said. Cora led me to a quiet corner of the garden, away from the reception guests, but still within sight of the main celebration. We stood among perfectly manicured rose bushes, the scent of flowers heavy in the warm afternoon air. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Cora wrapped her arms around herself, despite the warmth of the day. "How long have you known him?" she asked. "I met him this afternoon, a few hours before you saw us together." Her eyes widened. That's impossible. He talked about you like he'd known you for years. He's very good at understanding people quickly. I thought about William's explanation of his testing, but something told me that wasn't a story for Cora to hear. At least not today. Mom, I don't understand any of this. How did you end up here with William Ashford? How did he know about the money you gave me? About the dress? About everything? I could see the genuine confusion in her face, mixed with something that might have been fear. Her carefully constructed new world had just been shaken to its foundation, and she was struggling to make sense of it. He asked questions about my life, and I answered them honestly, just like I always have with you. But why would he care? Why would someone like him involve himself in our family problems? The way she said family problems, as if this was some minor disagreement rather than her complete rejection of me, sparked a flicker of anger. But I pushed it down. This wasn't the time for anger. Maybe because he recognizes that they're not problems, Cora. They're just differences. I may not have the money or status of the Whitmores, but that doesn't make me less valuable as a person. Or as your mother. Her face crumpled slightly. I never said you weren't valuable. Yes, you did. You said I was an embarrassment. You said I would ruin your wedding just by existing in the same space as your new family. You uninvited your own mother because you were ashamed of where you came from. I wasn't ashamed of you, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I wanted everything to be perfect. The Whitmores have such high standards, and I've worked so hard to fit in with them. And what about fitting in with your own family? What about honoring the woman who made it possible for you to have the education and opportunities that brought you to this place? Tears were starting to flow now, ruining her carefully applied makeup. I know you sacrificed for me, Mom. I know you worked hard and went without things so I could have more. But you never let me forget it. Every conversation, every disagreement, you always brought up what you'd given up for me. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I never meant to make you feel guilty. I just wanted you to understand that love sometimes requires sacrifice. That family means supporting each other through difficult times. But it felt like manipulation. Like I could never be my own person because I owed you too much to ever be free of you. I stared at her, this beautiful young woman in her expensive wedding dress, and for the first time I began to understand her perspective. Not agree with it, but understand it. So you decided to be free of me entirely. She nodded miserably. I thought if I could just start over with Bradley's family, I could be the person I wanted to be instead of the person who was shaped by poverty and struggle, and always having to be grateful for every small kindness. And who is that person, Cora? Who are you when you're not my daughter? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She looked around the elegant garden, at the expensive reception happening beyond the roses, at the new life she had built for herself. I don't know, she whispered. I thought I did, but after today, I don't know anymore. I reached out and took her hands, noting how soft they were, how carefully manicured. These were the hands of someone who had never had to work 3 jobs, or skip meals, or choose between heating and electricity. You're someone who was loved enough that your mother emptied her savings account for your wedding. You're someone who was given every opportunity to succeed because someone believed you were worth the sacrifice. You're someone whose mother sat on a bench across the street just to catch a glimpse of your happiness, even after you rejected her. She was crying openly now. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for what I said, for how I treated you. But I don't know how to fix this. Everyone in there heard what Mr. Ashford said. They know what I did. Bradley is furious with me. His parents think I'm a liar and probably a gold digger. Are you? I asked quietly. Am I what? A gold digger? Did you marry Bradley for his money? She was quiet for a long time. I don't know, she finally admitted. I loved him, but I also loved what he represented: security, status, never having to worry about money again. never having to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. Those aren't terrible things to want, Cora, but they're not the only things that matter. I know that now, but I don't know if it's too late. I looked back toward the reception, where I could see William standing exactly where we had left him, Charlie still at his side. He was talking with Charles Whitmore, and from their body language, it seemed to be a serious conversation. It's not too late to be honest about who you are and where you came from. It might be too late to maintain the fantasy you built about being someone else entirely, but that was always going to crumble eventually anyway. What do I do now, Mom? How do I fix this? For the first time since this whole ordeal began, she was asking for my advice instead of rejecting it. She was calling me Mom instead of trying to pretend I didn't exist. You start by telling the truth. To your husband, to his family, to yourself. You stop trying to be someone you're not and start being proud of who you are, including where you came from. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. And you? Will you forgive me? I thought about William's words about forgiveness requiring truth first. We had truth now, painful as it was. I love you, Cora. I've always loved you. But forgiveness, that's going to take time. And it's going to require you to show me that you've learned something from this, not just say you have. She nodded again, more firmly this time. I understand. And one more thing, I said, my voice growing stronger. I won't apologize for who I am or what I did to raise you. I'm proud of the life I gave you, even if you're not. And I won't shrink myself down anymore to make you comfortable with your choices. Something in her expression shifted, and for a moment I saw a flash of the little girl who used to be so proud to be my daughter. I wouldn't want you to, she said. I think I forgot how strong you are, how strong you had to be to raise me alone. We stood there in the garden for a few more minutes, not quite reconciled, but not quite estranged either. When we finally returned to the reception, William was waiting with an expression that suggested he had news to share. Everything all right? He asked gently. We're working on it, I said, and meant it. He smiled, then turned to include Cora in our conversation. I've been talking with your new father-in-law about some business opportunities. It seems he's been looking for investors for a new venture, and I might be interested in participating. Cora's eyes widened. The implications were clear. William's continued involvement in their lives, his tacit approval of the marriage, could mean the difference between acceptance and rejection from Bradley's family. But, William continued, his gaze moving between us, I only invest in families with integrity, families who are honest about their history and proud of their values. The message was unmistakable. Cora could have William's support and everything that came with it, but only if she stopped running from who she really was. I understand, she said quietly. William nodded, then turned to me. Eunice, I have a proposal for you as well, if you're interested in hearing it. 6 months later, I stood in my new office on the 15th floor of the Ashford Foundation building, looking out over a view of the city that still took my breath away. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the mahogany desk where I had just finished reviewing grant applications from families in crisis. Families like mine had been once upon a time. The transformation of my life had been gradual but profound. William's proposal that day at the wedding had been both simple and life-changing. He wanted me to head the Family Services Division of his charitable foundation, not as a token gesture or out of pity, but because he believed my experiences, both the struggles and the love that had carried me through them, gave me unique insight into what families truly needed. You understand poverty from the inside, he had explained during our first official meeting. But more importantly, you understand love, real love, not the conditional affection that disappears when circumstances change. That's exactly what our foundation has been missing. The salary he offered was more than I had ever imagined earning. $60,000 a year, with full benefits and a retirement plan that would ensure I never had to worry about my basic needs again. But more than the money, It was the work itself that fulfilled me. Every day, I reviewed applications from single mothers working multiple jobs, from families choosing between medicine and groceries, from people who had fallen through the cracks of a system that often seemed designed to help everyone except those who needed it most. And every day, I made sure that at least some of those families received the help they deserved. Charlie had become the office therapy dog, though William insisted that was Charlie's idea rather than his. The aging terrier seemed to have an instinct for which visitors needed comfort most. Today he was lying contentedly in his bed by the window, occasionally raising his head to monitor the activity in the hallway. A soft knock on my door interrupted my morning review of files. "Come in," I called. My assistant, Maria, poked her head through the doorway. "Mrs. Henderson, you have a visitor. She says she's your daughter." My heart did a small flutter. Cora and I had been slowly rebuilding our relationship over the past 6 months, but it was still fragile, still careful. We spoke on the phone every few weeks, and she had visited my new apartment twice, but she had never come to my office before. "Send her in, please." Cora entered wearing a simple blue dress that was elegant but not ostentatious. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail rather than the elaborate styles she had favored during her pursuit of Whitmore approval. She looked younger somehow, and more like the daughter I remembered from before she had decided I was an embarrassment. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that still surprised me after months of coldness. "Cora, this is unexpected. Is everything all right?" She settled into one of the comfortable chairs across from my desk, her eyes taking in the spacious office, the view, the evidence of my new life. "Everything's fine. I was in the area for a meeting and thought I'd stop by. I've never seen where you work." "What kind of meeting?" "Job interview, actually." She smiled, and it was genuine rather than the practiced expression she had worn for so long. "With a nonprofit that helps women start their own businesses. It's not glamorous, and it doesn't pay nearly what I was making at the marketing firm, but I think it's work I could actually believe in." I raised an eyebrow. Cora had quit her high-paying job 3 months earlier, shortly after her marriage had begun to stabilize. Bradley, to his credit, had been more understanding about her background than his parents initially were. William's continued friendship and business partnership with the Whitmores had certainly helped, but ultimately it was Cora's honesty about her past and her willingness to embrace rather than hide her origins that had won them over. "You left marketing to work with women entrepreneurs?" "I left marketing because I realized I was good at selling things to people who didn't need them, and terrible at selling myself as someone I wasn't." She gestured around the office. "I want to do something that matters. Something like what you're doing here." I felt a swell of pride, but tempered it with caution. Our relationship was better, but it was still built on a foundation that had been badly damaged. Trust was something we were rebuilding slowly, one honest conversation at a time. "Tell me about the position." For the next 20 minutes, Cora described the nonprofit, her interview, her hopes for the work. She spoke with an enthusiasm I hadn't heard from her since she was a child talking about her dreams. It was clear that she had thought seriously about this change, that it wasn't just a reaction to guilt about how she had treated me. "The pay cut will be significant," she admitted. "Bradley and I will have to adjust our lifestyle quite a bit. No more designer clothes, fewer dinners out, a smaller apartment eventually." "How does Bradley feel about that?" "He's been incredibly supportive. I think watching William work with his foundation showed him what it looks like when someone uses their advantages to help others instead of just accumulating more advantages." She paused. "He said he fell in love with the person I was before I started trying to be someone else, and he wants to meet that person again." "And who is that person?" It was the same question I had asked her in the garden on her wedding day, but this time she answered without hesitation. "Someone who knows what it's like to worry about money, but also knows that love doesn't cost anything. Someone who understands that where you come from matters less than where you're going, but that doesn't mean you have to lie about the journey." I nodded approvingly, This was growth, real growth, not just words designed to appease me. "There's something else," Cora said, her voice growing more serious. "I've been thinking about what you said about forgiveness taking time, about how I needed to show you that I'd learned something, not just say I had." "Yes?" "I want to do something to honor what you sacrificed for me, not because I feel guilty about it anymore, but because I'm proud of it now. Proud of having a mother who loved me enough to work 3 jobs and skip meals and wear the same dress for years so I could have opportunities she never had." My throat tightened. "Cora, let me finish. I've been talking with Bradley about starting a scholarship fund for single mothers who want to go to college but can't afford it. We want to call it the Eunice Henderson Scholarship for Academic Excellence." The words hit me like a gentle wave, washing over me with emotions I couldn't quite name. Pride, gratitude, love, and something else. A sense of completion, of a circle being closed in the most beautiful way possible. "You want to name a scholarship after me? I want to name it after the woman who showed me what real strength looks like, who proved that you can love someone unconditionally without enabling them to be less than their best selves." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I want other daughters to have mothers like you, and I want other mothers to know that their sacrifices matter, even when their children are too stupid to appreciate them at first." I had to take a moment to compose myself before I could speak. That's incredibly generous." "It's not generous. It's right." She leaned forward in her chair. "Mom, I know our relationship is still healing. I know I hurt you badly, and I know it's going to take time to fully repair the damage. But I want you to know that I see you now. I see what you did. I see what you gave up, and I see what you've built here in your new life. I'm proud to be your daughter." The tears I had been holding back finally spilled over. For so many years, those were the words I had longed to hear. Not gratitude born of obligation, but recognition born of understanding. "I'm proud of who you're becoming," I said. "The woman who wants to help other women build businesses, who's honest about her past, who's learned to value character over appearance. That's the daughter I always believed you could be." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the city move below us through the large windows. Charlie had wandered over and was now resting his head on Cora's foot, accepting gentle scratches behind his ears. "Will you consider being on the scholarship selection committee?" Cora asked. "I can't think of anyone better qualified to identify which applicants have the determination and character to succeed." "I'd be honored." She smiled, and for the first time in years, it reminded me of the little girl who used to beam with pride when she brought home a good report card or a drawing she had made especially for me. "There's one more thing," she said. "Bradley and I have been talking about starting a family. When that happens, I want my children to know their grandmother, the real grandmother, not some sanitized version who pretends to be something she's not. I want them to hear stories about how you worked 3 jobs and saved every penny to give me opportunities. I want them to understand that love sometimes requires sacrifice, and that the people who love them enough to make those sacrifices are the most valuable people in their lives." My heart felt so full I thought it might burst. "I would love that." "Good, because I have a feeling you're going to be an amazing grandmother. The kind who teaches them that kindness matters more than money, that character matters more than status, and that the best families are the ones who love each other regardless of circumstances." After Cora left, I remained at my desk for a long time, processing the conversation and the changes it represented. My phone buzzed with a text from William. "Dinner tonight? Charlie insists on the restaurant with the outdoor patio where he can people watch." I smiled as I typed back, "Of course, we have good news to celebrate." Over the past 6 months, William and I had developed an easy friendship built on mutual respect and shared values. He had never tried to make our relationship into something romantic. We were both still carrying too much history for that. But he had become a true friend, the kind of person who understood that the most important connections are built on character rather than convenience. As I gathered my things to leave for the day, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me was still recognizably the same person who had sat on that park bench 6 months ago, but she was transformed. She wore a tailored suit that fit perfectly. Her hair was professionally styled, and her posture spoke of confidence and purpose. But more than the external changes, there was something different in her eyes. They held the peace that comes from knowing your worth, from finding work that matters, from loving people who love you back in healthy ways. I had lost a daughter who was ashamed of me, but I had gained one who was proud of me. I had lost a life of financial struggle, but I had gained work that used my struggles to help others. I had lost the illusion that love meant accepting mistreatment, but I had gained the knowledge that real love, the kind worth having, requires honesty, respect, and mutual growth. As Charlie and I headed toward the elevator, I thought about the homeless man who had searched through garbage while his loyal dog waited patiently beside him. That man had been testing humanity, looking for evidence that kindness still existed in the world. I had passed his test by sharing my sandwich, but in the process, I had discovered something even more valuable, that I was worth more than I had ever believed, that my love and sacrifice had meaning, and that sometimes the most important transformations begin with the simplest acts of human compassion. The elevator doors closed behind us, and as we descended toward the street level where my new life was waiting, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete contentment with who I was and where I belonged. I was home. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.